Hi, howdy, hello, welcome back to another episode, another installment in the reading of the astavakra samhita. I hope you had a great time since I saw you last. Um, yeah, I guess we'll get right into it. Um, well, a little pretext. Um, so the way this book is, right? It's got Sanskrit. Let's get so you can see. It's got the Sanskrit, the uh, like Sanskrit broken down like word for word, English put together, like makes sense, and then breaking like if there's like a word in here that needs to get broken down, it like has an explanation of that. So like I'm gonna read this, then read that, and then like I'll raise my hand when there's like a little note, and then I'll go back and right, and then once we finish here, I'll read the note, and then um yeah, something like that. Okay. We'll have to play it by ear because like the way I read it in my head, we'll see how it translates. All right. Yanka said, how man knowledge acquires, how liberation will be, how renunciation is secured, and, O Lord, this me tell. Yanka said, how can knowledge be acquired? How can liberation be attained? How is renunciation possible? Tell me this, O Lord. Knowledge, realization of the identity of the individual self and the supreme self or Brahman, which is existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Liberation, freedom from ignorance, all bondage and limitations arising concomitant, concomitant, with knowledge, i.e., the complete destruction of all misery and the attainment of supreme bliss. Renunciation, unattachment to the pleasure and pain derived from worldly objects and even to the joyful life in heaven, which is also impermanent. This forms the most important of the four qualifications required of an aspirant for the attainment of self-knowledge. The other three qualifications being 1. Discrimination between the real and the unreal. 2. Acquisition of the six cardinal moral values. 3. Intense longing for the liberation. Intent, intense longing for liberation. The six cardinal moral values are A. Sama, restraining the outgoing propensities of the mind. B. Dhamma, restraining the external sense organs which through which the mind attaches self to sense objects. C. Uparati, withdrawing the self. Titiksa, forbearance. E. Samantana, self-settledness. F. Sradha, faith, the faith that is the grasp upon the ultimate, faith in the power of one's own self. It will it will be noted that renunciation is defined as unattachment. Both these terms must be understood in depth. Renunciation has nothing at all to do with giving up possessions as usually understood. Even one with no possessions has not renounced them if mentally he still identifies himself with them and therefore either desires them or rejects them. Unattachment is not indifference, nor is it the suppression of natural feelings of pleasure and pain. Attachment springs from the concept of duality, the idea that there are more entities than one. Okay, pause. Um, this is going into like they're not explaining the terms anymore. They're like giving a summary of like a big summary of the whole thing, right? With the explained knowledge, right? Um, forgot about this part. Just had to put that tidbit in there. This isn't the book, like this isn't like the Sanskrit words anymore. This is the words of the people, but this makes sense before we go back and reread the original Sanskrit um like translation. Okay, just had to get that out there you know, since you can't see the book, like I'm going to describe how it's set up so you can understand how it's being read fully. Okay. We're just going to restart that paragraph. Attachment springs from the concept of duality, the idea that there are more entities than one. These entities are, on the one hand, the individual self, including the mind and the senses, and, on the other, the world. Within the individual self, there is consciousness. The individual is consciousness identified with his own body, mind, and senses. He regards other individuals and all objects as separate and different from himself. As long as this identification persists, the individual's relationship with the world will be based upon this sense of difference. The individual is attracted to persons and things that he likes, and he is repelled by those he does not like. Pleasure and pain are rooted in attraction and attraction and repulsion are rooted in the conception of duality. The conception of duality can only be resolved in the conception of the unity of consciousness, the self in all being and all things. There is but one absolute existence. Whatever is perceived by the mind and the senses is only a temporary appearance of superimposed on the self. Of, is Whatever is perceived by the mind and the senses is only a temporary appearance superimposed on the self. The self in all is thus the only reality. The world is unreal, for it has no absolute reality. The reality of the world is in the self, not in its outer form. Living in the world, we ordinarily are not aware of the self as the only reality. We take the superimposed form to be the reality. This state is described as ignorance. Any relationship that we establish between ourselves and the world, except on the basis of the reality of the self and the unreality of the world, is an act of ignorance. Knowledge comes with the perception of the self. The conception of the unity of consciousness revolutionizes the relationship between the individual and the world. While ignorance persists and attraction is rooted in the conception of duality, we mistake the real content of our attraction for the objects of the world. But with the attainment of knowledge, we realize that it is the self, the one real existence in all, that is the source of our attraction to them. As the Brahmanyaka Upanishad says, 2.4.5, it is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is loved, but for the sake of the self that the husband is loved. When objects are viewed as real in themselves, we identify ourselves with them and are thus attached to them. Attachment, then, is false identification. While attachment springs from ignorance, unattachment springs from knowledge. Okay, go back. Yanka said, how can knowledge be acquired? How can liberation be attained? How is renunciation possible? Tell me this, O Lord. Astavakra said, O child, if you, liberation, wish, then, the objects of the senses, like poison, shun, forgiveness, sincerity, kindness, contentment, and truth, like nectar, seek. Astavakra replied, if you aspire after liberation, my child, shun the objects of the senses as poison, and seek forgiveness, sincerity, kindness, contentment, and truth as nectar. 1. Objects. Attachment to worldly objects is a great bar to spiritual progress, and hence they should be shunned as bitter poison. The giving up of external objects implies also the necessity of controlling the sense organs. 2. Sincerity. To be one in mind and speech. This is an essential virtue of spiritual discipline. 3. Truth. This virtue is the sine qua non of spiritual aspiration and the most precious possession of the aspirant. The cultivation of these virtues implies the control and purification of the internal sense of the mind so that it may reflect more and more of the light of the self. This verse describes the negative and positive practices of a spiritual aspirant. Giving up attachment to worldly things is the negative practice, and cultivation of the moral virtues is the positive. Astavakra replied, "If you aspire after liberation, my child, shun the objects of the senses as poison, and seek forgiveness, sincerity, kindness, contentment, and truth as nectar. You earth, not water, not fire, not air, not space, or not you for liberation, self, of these witness consciousness itself, no. You are neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air, nor space. In order to attain liberation, know the self as the witness of all these and as consciousness itself. Earth, etc. These are the five elements which constitute body, mind, and the universe. The self is externally distinct from them. It is consciousness itself, and it is their witness. Liberation lies in knowing the self as such. You are neither earth, nor water, nor fire, nor air, nor space. In order to attain liberation, know the self as the witness of all these, and as consciousness itself. If you, bodies separating in consciousness, resisting remain, then you, now even happy, peaceful, free from bondage, will be. If you detach yourself from the body and the rest of consciousness, you will at once be happy, peaceful, and free from bondage. One, detach, etc. Herein lies the essence of the Advaita Sadhana. Yeah, I think so. I think that's how you say that. By identifying the self with the body, which is not self, and thus ascribing to the self the limitations of the body, such as birth, death, old age, or disease, we suffer all kinds of misery. The self is really not the body. So if we can only get rid of this identification, we shall at once realize we are consciousness itself and thus become happy and free from bondage. 2. At once, the very moment the self is known as distinct from the body, because the self is never really affected by the body and mind. They merely hide its glory as clouds hide the sun. If you detach yourself from the body and rest in consciousness, you will at once be happy, peaceful, and free from bondage. You, Brahmana, or any other caste, not belonging to an ashrama, not visible to the eyes, not you, unattached, formless, witness of all, are happy be. You do not belong to the Brahmana or any other caste or to any ashrama. You are not perceived by the senses, unattached, formless, and witness be of you. I'm gonna restart that. Unattached, formless, and witness of all are you. Be happy. 1. Ashrama. Ashrama. Yeah, there's no T. It's ashrama. The four stages of a Hindu's life prescribed by the scriptures: Brahmajnana, student life; Garahastya, householder's life; Vanaprastha, forest life; and Sannyasa, life of renunciation. Neither caste nor ashrama nor any other such designation can be predicated of the self. The man of self-knowledge therefore has no obligation to perform duties pertaining to them. 2. Senses. The Sanskrit word of aski literally means eyes, but aska implies senses, all outer organs of perception. 3. Happy. By realizing your own nature as unattached, as formless, and as witness, you do not belong to the Brahmana or any other caste or to any ashrama. You are not perceived by the senses. Unattached, formless, and witness of all are you. Be happy. O all-pervading one, virtue and vice, pleasure, pain, mental, yours, not you, doer not, are enjoyer not, are ever free, surely are. Virtue and vice, pleasure and pain, are of the mind, not of you. O all-pervading one, you are neither doer nor enjoyer, verily you are ever free. 1. Virtue and vice. These spring respectively from right and wrong actions, pleasure and pain. Effects of virtue and vice on the mind. Virtue and vice, pleasure and pain are all mental states which affect us only when we identify ourselves with the mind and think of ourselves as doers and enjoyers. Virtue and vice, pleasure and pain are of the mind, not of you, O all-pervading one. You are neither doer nor enjoyer. Verily, you are ever free. You of all one seer are, ever really free, are surely this alone, your bondage, that you, the seer, as one see. You are the one seer of all, and are really ever free. Verily, this alone is your bondage, that you see yourself not as the seer, but as something other. One seer. One seer. The self is the only subject, the entire universe being the object. 2. Bondage, which consists in identifying the self, the external subject, the witness of the universe, with with the body, the mind, and the universe. You are the one seer of all and are really ever free. Verily, this alone is your bondage, that you see yourself not as the seer, but as something other. I, doer this, bitten by the great black serpent of egoism, you, I, doer not, such nectar of faith drinking happy be. Do you have do you who have been bitten by the great black serpent of egoism, I am the doer, drink the nectar of the faith, I am not the doer, and be happy. 1. Black serpent, because egoism causes spiritual death. 2. Nectar, it resuscitates and removes all pain. Destruction of egoism restores spiritual consciousness and frees one from misery. Do you who have been bitten by the great black serpent of the egoism, I am the doer, drink the nectar of the faith, I am not the doer, and be happy. Water break. Water break. 18 minutes deep, I think. Can't see. Maybe I need glasses. All right. I, one, pure consciousness, this, by the fire of this conviction, the force of ignorance, burning from free from grief, happy be. Burn down the force of ignorance with the fire of the conviction, I am the one and with pure consciousness, and be free from grief and be happy. One, oh, I totally forgot to raise my hand on that one. We're going to reread it. Burn down the forest of ignorance with the fire of the conviction, I am the one and the pure consciousness, and be free from grief and be happy. 1. Forest. Just as one cannot see one's way in the forest, so ignorance obstructs the vision of truth. 2. 1. Because nothing exists except the self. 3. Pure. Self-effulgent, effulgent. Our present consciousness is not pure, as it always has a not self as its object. Burn down the forest of ignorance with the fire of the conviction. I am the one and pure consciousness, and be free from grief and be happy. In which this universe, like a snake on a rope, imagined, appears, bliss, supreme bliss, that consciousness you are, happily live. You are that consciousness, bliss, supreme bliss, in and upon which this universe appears superimposed, like a snake on a rope. Live happily. 1. Like, etc. This is an oft repeated analogy of Advaita. In the dark of night, a rope is mistaken for a snake. The rope does not really become a snake, it has no other reality than the rope itself. In the same way, this universe has no real existence. In it is the self, pure consciousness, and supreme bliss in which this universe, through ignorance, is seen to exist. Consciousness, which is the substratum of the universe, remains eternally pure and unaffected. We are that consciousness. Therefore, we must cease identifying ourselves with a superimposed universe, and thus we shall be happy. You are that consciousness, bliss, supreme bliss, in and upon which this universe appears superimposed like a snake on a rope. Live happily. Surely, one who considers himself free, free; one who considers himself bound, also bound. Is as the thought, so attainment is in this world, this popular saying true. He who considers himself free is free indeed, and he who considers himself bound remains bound. As one thinks, so one becomes, is a popular saying in this world, and it is quite true. 1. He. This is a very significant utterance, and one that contains an invaluable lesson for those who wish to attain self-realization. In reality, the self is ever free. It never enters into a state of bondage. It is our ignorance that we think ourselves bound, and this thought makes our supposed bondage persist and continue. If, however, we constantly think ourselves as the eternally free self, we shall realize that we are ever free. He who considers himself free is free indeed, and he who considers himself bound remains bound. As one thinks, so one becomes is a popular saying in this world, and it is quite true. Self-witness, all-pervading, perfect, one, free, consciousness, actionless, unattained, desireless, quiet, through illusion, of the world, as if is. The self is witness, all-pervading, perfect, one, free, consciousness, actionless, unattached, desireless, and quiet. Through illusion, it appears as if it is of the world, i.e., subject to the ever-repeating cycle of birth and death. 1. 1. Devoid of all differentiation from like or unlike objects and of all attributes. 2. Of the world, bound by the desires of the world and involved in the cycle of birth and rebirth, unlike what has been described of the self in this verse. The self is witness, all-pervading, perfect, one, free, consciousness, actionless, unattached, desireless, and quiet. Through illusion, it appears as if it is of the world, i.e., subject to the ever-repeating cycle of birth and death. I, reflection of the self, this, illusion, giving up, external, so also internal identifications of the self, relinquishing immutable consciousness, non-dual self, meditate. Having given up external and internal self-modifications and the illusion, I am the reflected, individual self. Meditate on the Atman as immutable consciousness and non-dual. 1. External. Identification of the self with physical and mental conditions such as this is my body, external, and I am happy or unhappy, internal. 2. Reflected. Finite consciousness, which is the reflection of the self in the mind, which circumscribes its infinitude. Having given up external and internal self-modifications, ooh, holy shit, I just had a fucking brain blast. Having given up external and internal self-modifications and the illusion, I am the reflected individual self. Meditate on the Atman as immutable consciousness and non-dual. Child, you, by the noose of body consciousness long bound, are, so, I intelligence this, with the sword of knowledge, that cutting off happy be. My child, you have long been caught in the noose of body consciousness. Sever it with the sword of the knowledge, I am consciousness, and be happy. 1. Long. Through ignorance it is without a beginning. It ends with the dawn of knowledge. My child, you have long been caught in the noose of body consciousness. Sever it with the sword of the knowledge, I am consciousness, and be happy. You, unattached, actionless, self-effulgent, without blemish, this, indeed, surely your bondage that you, meditation, practice. You are unattached, actionless, self-effulgent, and without any blemish. This indeed is your bondage that you practice meditation. 1. Bondage, etc. The self is really ever free, yet we betake ourselves to meditation and other similar practices. Such attempts presuppose that we think ourselves bound, and so long as we continue to think ourselves bound, we remain bound and freedom is impossible. Astavakra wants us to give up this thought altogether. For, as he has said previously, one who considers himself free is free indeed, as surely as one who looks upon himself as bound remains bound. You are unattached, actionless, self-effulgent, and without any blemish. This indeed is your bondage that you practice meditation. This universe by you, pervaded, in you, diffused, and you, really, pure consciousness by nature, are little-mindedness, not attain. You pervade this universe, and this universe exists in you. You are really pure consciousness by nature. Do not be small-minded. 1. Pervade, etc. The self is the substance of the universe, just as gold is the substance of a gold ornament. 2. Exists, etc. Just as a clay pot exists in clay, the name and form existing in the substance without a separate existence. 3. Small-minded, unbecoming your true nature, than which nothing is greater. I'm going to read that again. Small-minded, unbecoming your true nature, than which nothing is greater. You pervade this universe, and this universe exists in you. You are really pure consciousness by nature. Do not be small-minded. You, unconditioned, immutable, devoid of bulk and form, of cool disposition, of unfathomable intelligence, perturbed, are so you, desiring for consciousness alone, be. You are unconditioned, immutable, formless, of cool disposition, of unfathomable intelligence, and unperturbed. Desire consciousness alone. 1. Of cool disposition, as opposed to the individual whose mind is consumed by the heat of passions. 2. Unfathomable, because the self is beyond the limitations of relative knowledge. 3. Unperturbed, unaffected by any external or internal phenomena. You are unconditioned, immutable, formless, of cool disposition, of unfathomable intelligence and unperturbed desire consciousness alone. That which has form, unreal, no, the formless, but permanent, no, by this instruction about truth, possibility of rebirth, not is. Know that which has form to be unreal and the formless to be permanent. Through this spiritual instruction, you will escape the possibility of rebirth. 1. That, etc., the body, etc. 2. Formless, the self. 3. Escape, etc. The round of rebirth, no, the round of birth and rebirth is solely due to the identification of the oh my gosh, I got to restart this one. The round of birth and rebirth is solely due to the identification of the eternal self with the body, mind, etc. It is destroyed by the knowledge of the true nature of the self. Know that which has form to be unreal and the formless to be permanent. Through this spiritual instruction, you will escape the possibility of rebirth. As just existing in a mirror, in an image within, without, and that mirror exists, so just in this body, inside, outside, and the Supreme Lord exists. Just as a mirror exists within and without the image reflected in it, so the Supreme Self exists in and outside this body. The idea is this: the image in the mirror has no real existence. It is a mere appearance. Only the mirror exists. Similarly, only the self exists. Body, mind, etc. have no real existence. It is only by being superimposed on the self that they appear to exist. Just as the reflection cannot affect the mirror, so the body, mind, etc. cannot affect the self. Just as a mirror exists within and without the image reflected in it, so the Supreme Self exists inside and outside this body. As the same, as the same, all pervading space in a jar, outside, inside, and exists, so eternal, all pervasive, Brahman, in all things exists. Just as the same all-pervading space is inside and outside a jar, so the eternal and all-pervasive Brahman exists in all things. Just as the same all-pervading space is inside and outside a jar, so the eternal, all-pervasive Brahman exists in all things. All right, that's chapter 1. Hopefully that made sense. Little head tilty thing was like, so like, I'll show you the Sanskrit, right, broken down or whatever, sometimes has like many words in a phrase. Like the one about like body consciousness, right? Like the child you have long, like sometimes like there's really long sets of Sanskrit that's like translating. So the head nod was kind of to differentiate like the sets of Sanskrit words, I guess. Looked like I was having a fucking spasm, didn't it? Felt like it. But now time to go back and reread some of the highlights. Jewel break first though. What'd you guys think? Hopefully you guys thought it was good. This is pretty long form content. Really hope y'all stick around, for the whole videos. But pause, make your own conclusion, come up with your own thing. you know. And now I'm gonna go over the things that I highlighted that I thought, you know, I'm gonna give my take, I guess, right? So the first one, the how can knowledge be acquired? How can liberation be attained? How is renunciation possible? Tell me this, O Lord. What I take away from that the most was will be noted that renunciation is defined as unattachment. Both these terms must be understood in depth. Renunciation has nothing at all to do with giving up possessions, as usually understood. Even one with no possessions has not renounced them if mentally he still identifies himself with them and therefore either desires them or rejects them. Unattached is not indifference, nor is it the suppression of natural feelings of pleasure and pain. Um, yeah, like, so it talks about, like, we always like talk about renunciation or like giving up things or like you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that because it's good or bad for you. Like, you just do what comes, right? Like, renunciation, like, in renunciation, you have to, it's not by not doing it, by restraining yourself or like giving something up. As long as you still want something you don't have, you're still attached to it. Type beat. You know what I'm saying? Um, and then yeah, unattachment is not indifference, nor is it the suppression of natural feelings of pleasure and pain. Like, you take what comes, and it's you enjoy it for what it is, and you live in the moment, whatever that moment may be. Um, I would say that's probably the how I would put it, the best way. Next highlight. Pleasure and pain are rooted in attraction and repulsion, and attraction and repulsion are rooted in the conception of duality. Pretty much just kind of like what I was saying. Things are only good or bad, right? Pleasure and pain come from whether you want it or don't want it, and that only comes from you thinking there's two things instead of looking at it as it is what it fucking is. You're like, oh, it should be this word and it can't be that. Like, just be like, it, it is what it is, chief. I think, next highlight. There is but one absolute existence. Whatever is perceived by the mind and the senses is only a temporary appearance superimposed on the self. Um, yeah, that's a fucking deep one, huh? There's there is just one. Like, that's it. And everything that we see is a part of that one. So that's why you like treat everything as if it's you, you know, because it is you. Um, because all of this reality is just consciousness projecting itself here to experience it for the good and the bad and see what's possible in the gambit of things that could be possible because it's outside of what we can conceive, and it's who really cares? I mean, I guess, right? Like, it is what it is, whatever it may be, but we're not gonna get there until we fucking realize this shit that we're all fucking one, type beat. But nonetheless, we'll go to the next one. This was that quote from the Upanishad. It is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is loved, but for the sake of the self that the husband is loved. Um, I guess I didn't go and read that Upanishad right, but like the way I take that is like you you love somebody else not because they're somebody else. You love them because um they're a part of like you. They're like a part of the self, I guess maybe. Um I just think that that's really important. Like, that's a crazy quote. More or less was a takeaway from that. Um, and then this is all explained in that fucking first one, right? The first one, the how can knowledge be, Yanka said, how can knowledge be acquired? How can liberation be attained? How is renunciation possible? Tell me this, O Lord. It was all just explaining that. Crazy, right? All right, next one. The verse. Astavakra replied, if you aspire after liberation, my child, shun the objects of the senses as poison and seek forgiveness, sincerity,